Good evening. Welcome to Bangalore International Centre. I think all of us have seen the effects of the rain in Bengaluru. Those of us who live in the more low-lying parts of the city have not just seen it, but have felt it in very visceral and traumatic ways. And even when we had what we used to call a normal monsoon, we still used to see floods in the city. And now with climate change, we are seeing intense rainfall much more often beyond the parameter of designing for 75 millimeters per hour, which is what a lot of conventional stormwater drainage systems are designed for. Peak. That's a peak rainfall intensity that you're supposed to design for, and the problem is just getting worse. Now, it's not rocket science as to what we need to do. So the question is, why aren't we doing it? Who should be responsible for doing it? And the intention of this evening is to have a conversation where there is greater clarity, so we can bring that clarity into the public domain, so we can demand of the powers that be to do what is needed. We have three eminent speakers who have been working in this area for a long time. The first is Nirmala Gowda, who's a computer science and started off as a computer science engineer, and then moved on and to do an MSc in environmental management. And after working for more than a decade in the US, she has returned to her homeland, Bengaluru, and has devoted herself to working on environmental issues, on river pollution, river rights, and justice issues in the Kaveri Basin. She's a trustee of Bangalore Environment Trust and has founded the organization Pani.Earth, where you can see a lot of her work. Our second speaker is Vishwanath, who is popularly known as Zen Rain Man. He started off as a civil engineer, then an urban planner, worked with the Housing and Urban Development Corporation for 14 years, but has after that devoted himself full-time to solving water issues facing urban and rural communities. He's a trustee at the Biome Environmental Trust, an organization assisting communities in water and sanitation issues. And his articles appear frequently in mainstream news publications. Our third speaker is Saldhana, who is a full-time coordinator and trustee of the Environment Support Group, working in areas of environmental law and policy, decentralization, urban planning, and a variety of human rights and development-related issues. He's a keen campaigner on critical environmental and social justice issues, and in fact, some of the court cases he has initiated have been precedent-setting. The conversation will be moderated by Meera K., who's the co-founder of Citizen Matters, an award-winning civic media platform. And she also helped initiate Open City and Urban Data Platform. She is an Ashoka Fellow, recognized for her work in building open knowledge platforms that allow citizens to collaborate and improve their cities. So we'll have presentations of about 10 minutes each by each of the three speakers. We'll start with Meera, then actually Leo's running a little late, so Vishwanath, maybe you can go second, and then Leo third. And then I will request Meera and all the three speakers to come onto the stage, and we'll have a moderated discussion between all. Can I request everyone to please turn off their mobiles or put them on silent? So Meera will moderate a discussion between the three speakers. And after that, we'll have an open Q&A, and hopefully we'll have a rich discussion on this and come up with some issues that we can perhaps document and put into the public domain as an outline agenda of what needs to be done. So I invite Nirmala to come up and give her presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. First off, he used the word eminent. I'm very scared. No, first off, I'm no expert. I'm an ordinary citizen trying to make sense of the world. Second off, I have my two colleagues here. Please raise your hand. Madhuri and Nidhi, two co-founders of Pani.Earth, who have made this presentation and the work behind it possible. I want to acknowledge that support. Having said that, like Prem said, we have 10 minutes for the presentation. So it kind of start off with the magnitude of the problem of floods globally and kind of deep dive into what happened in Mahadevpura zone using Koramangala Chalagatta Valley hydrological map that we are working on, which is currently in progress for perspective, right? So this is kind of really hyper-local, looking at what's really happened and why we are here today. So World Bank estimates 19% of the global population are exposed to significant flood risk. As we can see here in the image, India and China has the highest population exposed to significant flood risk, with 329 million in China and 225 million in India. India is the highest in terms of extremely poor people exposed to floods. That's 35 million is the number that we are looking at. That's 2.5% of our overall population. What happened during the September floods? It's very heartbreaking to see economically vulnerable sections like people from Munekololu lose their belongings, being hurt disproportionately. They are daily wage earners who, if they don't go to work, there's no food on the table. Their meager belongings destroyed, their houses damaged. This time around, the exceptional rains also impacted the high income areas. So how did we get there? That's the kind of exploration that we're going to go in the next few minutes. So this is the map of KC Valley, that is Koramangala Chalagatta Valley, and we picked KC Valley for obvious reasons. Obviously, it is the most impacted. The second reason being, we worked with the government and NGT on Bengaluru Lake rejuvenation, so we have first-hand information about what's happening in the catchment. We have written hundreds and hundreds of pages of reports, both for the benefit of the government, for the citizenry, and also to NGT. So that's kind of the knowledge that we have on the catchment itself. As you can see here, I might have to zoom a little bit. This red line, the area inside this red line is the BBMP area. So BBMP occupies 88% of the Koramangala Chalagatta Valley, KC Valley, while the orange shade that you see are the taluks, right? The purple ones that you see here are the industrial areas. The blue polygons are the lakes itself. The lines, the blue lines that you see is the drainage. This is the Koramangala stream. This is a Chalagatta stream here from Alsur, and here you have the Tavarekere stream going into Agara and then to Bengaluru. The ones here in brown, dark brown, are the lakes that have gone extinct. So these are some, and here the green spaces here, this is Kaban Park and this is Lalbagh, and the area here is completely military. With this perspective, and I know there are 4 zones inside the BBMP area and it cannot be seen because the subtler colors have been used. But downstream of Bengaluru is generally the Mahadevpura zone. It's very important to understand that from here on, downstream is Mahadevpura zone because that's the most impacted from a hydrology perspective, from the flood perspective as well. So here, in this map, as you can see, How did we get here? So the answer to that is human occupation of water spaces, right? As you can see here, Saraki, Putinali, and for example, even Lalbagh does not have the connectivity, right? That drainage connecting to the rest of the lakes, to the hydrology, is non-existent. It's because it's built over. Comptroller Auditor General, in his 2021 audit report, mentioned that the Kormangla stream in the 1900s had 113 kilometers of drainage. But then in 2016, it was reduced to 63 kilometers. Right? So where would the water go generally, right? Additionally, whatever remained is impervious. It's impervious because you've concretized the stormwater drain like a box drain, or if you've not concretized this, the siltation, the solid waste. When I say waste, it's solid waste, sewage, industrial effluents. A mix of this have accumulated, which we call a silt, but it's actually muck, toxic muck, and it's made the layer impervious. Right? So this is the imperviousness of the waterways, that's the stormwater drains, that's largely a big problem. Then the second one here is the imperviousness of the lakes itself, right? These are the extinct lakes. This is a Kormangla stream, upstream of Bengaluru. So you have Srinivagilu, Koramangala, Sunakal, 3 lakes that have gone extinct. Imagine if these 3 lakes could have harnessed the flood waters of September. Would we still have had floods? So that's kind of the perspective I want to give with this map, right? And that feeds into Bengaluru. So in the absence of these water bodies, what would be the force of water entering Bengaluru, right? Now if you go to the Chelagatta stream, this one here, Upparalli, Domblur, Chelagatta, all built up, non-existent. They are not providing us any flood protection. But then Alsur still exists, but there's a problem with it. In order to prevent pollution, the lake has been bypassed. As in, when the water comes, it doesn't enter Alsur, but it just flows downstream. So even though the Alsur lake exists, it's disconnected from the total hydrology. Right? So what we are seeing here is 2 major streams, Kormangla and Chelagatta, completely absent from flood protection. Right? So this is a hyperlocal analysis that we can look at this point in time. And you can see Chelagatta, Embassy Golf Links, KGA, then you have ST bed here. Koramangla, 80 acres of Koramangla Lake has been occupied by National Dairy Research Institute, Sunakal, Shantinagar bus stand. And this venue here today is on Damblur Lake. Right? So these are the kind of dynamics that are playing there. And in the next slide, you see the purple dots? So this is the diversion showing Alsur. So Alsur exists, but is not working as flood protection. So the same thing applies for all the lakes that have been diverted. And all the lake diversions have happened in a bid to prevent pollution from entering the lakes. That handling of that solution to pollution has actually increased our vulnerability to floods. Right? So now it's no wonder Bengaluru just water was gushing out of it with that kind of a force. Yeah. Bengaluru is also diverted, as you can see here and here. We vigorously had discussions in terms of not diverting this, but treating pollution at source. But unfortunately, the diversion happened. And in the September floods, the diversion broke off and the water entered the lake and then subsequently overflowed, right? In the next slide, here, you see these cloud icons. So the bigger cloud, meaning there's just a lot more locations there, so it kind of is a larger area. And the blue cloud throughout the map represents BBMP identified flood locations for the year 2020-2021, right? Then the ones in green, apart from the BBMP identified locations, these locations flooded in September, right? So you can see much of the September flooding is downstream of Bengaluru. It's in the Mahadevpura area, right? This normal flood locations as identified in the BBMP area is up here. And you can also see wherever there are waterways, that's your Rajakaluways, extinct lakes, there's a lot of flood locations. So that's very clear. Additionally, if you come here near Vartur, you see these lines. It says Panatur Main Road, and Panatur Main Road actually exists here on the map, but the lines are not visible here. So these flood locations go right on Panatur Main Road. So it goes on these lines. This is Vartur Road. Then you can see these flood locations on Outer Ring Road, and this is on Sarjapur Road. So what this tells us is that the roads don't have proper drainage, right? So this is kind of what we are looking at. So then generally, ease of doing business. For the first time, I saw this document in Karnataka State Pollution Controls Board files that in 2014 circular, which said ease of business is really important, and they had all sorts of modifications to the kind of way they were working to promote ease of business. So there's deep concession in terms of environment, there's deep concessions in terms of labor, deep discounts in terms of land and other resources that the industries need to set up, all rightly so, we need development. But then, I suppose we need to have good drainage and road infrastructure as well. In the light of what has happened recently, I think that perhaps tops the list. Right? Ease of business means you have to have basic infrastructure. Right? That's one. And WRI's research showed that for every dollar spent on flood protection measure results in $238 in avoided damages. So it also makes economic sense for us to invest in flood-proofing our city. Yes, that's kind of about it. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thanks Nirmala for setting the stage. And what's the use of a panel if we don't disagree with each other on stage, right? Because the point of it all is coming to some form of conclusion. I call it the tyranny of small decisions. It's also death by nostalgia. It's death by nostalgia. That's what Bangalore is suffering from, because it's coming from the past all the time, right? This glorious garden city, what we had as tanks, what we now call lakes, Rajakaluways. These have entered the lexicon of our day-to-day discourse, and that's what we talk about. But I think one of the philosophies that we can think around is the tyranny of small decisions, and seemingly local small decisions taken at particular points of time, then add up to a consequent large-scale impact way down. And that's Alfred Khan in the 60s. This is one of the photographs that I always show, Ragurai's classic of aquifers. This is Agarsen ki Bawdi, full of waters. The water disappears, the skeleton remains, the soul is gone. We don't notice the soul going, right? But we don't ask, for example, in the city, what do aquifers mean? What is groundwater? Can it play a role in supplementing water supply to the city? Can it play a role in flood mitigation? For example, can the flood waters be taken into the aquifers, managed, right? So that's one of the things that we need to remember. For Bangalore, is geology destiny? One of the questions that we ask, and because we have 3,400 million-year-old history in this place, the rock at Lalbagh, Gnees, 920 meters above sea level, takes special skills of maladministration and misgovernance to create floods or what is waterlogging in a city, right? Because we're at 920 meters, everything falls down to 200 meters. If you're creating waterlogging, for sure it's human-made, right? And the human-made is actually infrastructure and buildings and houses which are creating the waterlogging. Linear infrastructures, typically roads are one of the big challenges. Roads get layered, start to build up, sites sink, waterlogging occurs, cross drainage works are never thought of, sheet flows of water are never thought of, always line stream flows of water. That's what the engineer designs for, but sheet flows of water is the dominant form of water flow in many areas, never accommodated, even in lakes. So therefore, 920 meters above sea level, and therefore we have this need to bring water to the city from 100 kilometers and 300 meters below the city. And then from the rocks, we've used it up, created quarries and done things, and we've done beautiful things. And this is what Bangalore was in the past, a city of lakes, but also wells, right? The same rock being used. And this is the drainage path that I was showing more in great detail. Broad ridge line running through the city, to the left of the city, dendritic pattern, steep flows to the right of the city, as shown by Arun in his magnificent videos. More gentler flow, but still a steep flow, right? So what you see is west to east flows in the Kormangala Chalagatta Valley and the Hebbal Valley, and the north to south flows in the Vrishbhavati, Arkavati Valley, which also has different hydrogeology. You know, the ability of the aquifer to absorb water in the Arkavati Vrishbhavati basin is way more than that it is in the Dakshin Pinakini Valley. So something to remember. And then look at the headlines, and what we've been discussing now is floods. Not so long back, 2018, running out of drinking water. Running out of groundwater, we've run out of groundwater according to the Niti Aayog detailed study. Affecting access to 100 million people. Half of the metro likely to be uninhabitable by 2023. Next year, folks, half of us will have to go. Few years, this is all 2019, city of burning lakes. I mean, we have to make up our minds. What are we? Are we a city running out of water, groundwater, having to evacuate? Are we a city of floods? What are we? Are a city of burning lakes and so on? And then this nostalgia for the lakes. The lakes themselves are 1,200 years old. They are not lakes, they are tanks, human-made. They were the first to start to destroy our rivers. They were the dams of the past. As much as dams kills river, tanks killed our rivers. But we glorify it. We see it as some beautiful entity which has been designed for flood control. No, it's not been designed for flood control. The tanks are not for flood control. There's catchment and runoff along a drainage line. Beautiful tanks. And Kalways, we start to talk about Raj Kalways as though it's some kind of a living entity. What is a Raj Kalway? A Raj Kalway is a construct which takes water from one tank to the other tank for an irrigation system, right? Not that. There are other Kalways in place. This is what is called a Posha Kalway. This is Kalways which bring water from the catchment into the lake. Are they to be treated as sacrosanct? Thus, another Kalway which goes into the Achkat or the command area to grow rice. And so therefore, we have these Kalways growing paddy. So this was the land of paddy. If you want to figure out what Bangalore was, just have to step out to Kolar, 70 kilometers away. This was the land. This is what we built upon. So the green of Bangalore urbanizing and becoming red in so many of these GIS figures is actually paddy fields being built upon. It's not trees being destroyed. Paddy fields being built upon. Paddy fields, flat, level land, clay puddling, hundreds of years, inability to absorb water, inability of waters to drain, and the floods occur here in these command areas, not in the lakes. They occur here, not in the tanks. So that's something to remember about. So what are the Kalways we want to protect, right? So are these the Kalways we want to protect? Kalways meant to distribute water into paddy fields. Should they be recognized in revenue maps of 1904 and JCBs move around to destroy them? For what purpose? What is the meaning? We have to have a stormwater drainage plan and a map and to do things better, right? So this is the tank ecosystem that we have. The tanks were built essentially for irrigation. They had a Kodi. The Kodi was meant to hold water, right? And this is the overflow Kodi. This was a design of scarcity. This was a land of scarcity where 7 out of 10 years is less than average rainfall. You want water for paddy cultivation. You need to hold on to every drop of water. If you get abundance, the system fails. And designs of scarcity occur incrementally. You design normatively. You design year by year. And then when you're faced with a flood of a century, even the old tank system would fail, right? We forget that. So it's something to remember and recollect. And then there was the cultural thing about the tank ecosystem, all gone. All in the past. Do we think that this system will come back to save us in the present or in the future? This system, for example, this, all iniquitous at that particular point of time, beautiful photographs, all that, and the wells there, right? So also let's remember, the tank ecosystem, the glorious 1,000 tanks were not sufficient for Bangalore's water supply. In 1876 to 78, 3 years of continuous drought, 1 lakh people died in this city. The population of the city was less than 2 lakhs. In the old Mysore kingdom, 1 lakh people died. The tanks were insufficient to give water to the city of 1.5 lakh people to 2 lakh people. So tank systems, which are local systems, are very prone to droughts, especially continuous droughts. Therefore, you had to go to Hezarghatta and get water. The plague had its influence. Many of the tanks water had to be taken out because it was associated with plague and malaria. Malaria was the reason many of the tanks were drained, right? We forget why we drain tanks. We think it's some evil thing that we are doing. Of course, this real estate greed also linked into it, but also malaria, also plague. And then we have to get the piped water supply from far. Some people believe that that's not necessary. But unless you get piped water from far, you can't support megalopolises or metropolises, right? So, and then now we are hit with the urban heat island effect. So more intense rainfall, more localized rainfall. And luckily we have measuring stations. Can we put these measuring stations of the KSNDMC to better use? Can we now granulate our design? Can we design for stormwater drains which are able to take 15 times the load that the traditional caloways were subject to, or the tanks were subject to? We have to get modern stormwater drain, and design has to respond to higher intensity of rainfall and higher runoff, right? So therefore, one of the thinking was, can everybody, every plot be involved as part of the solution? Can every plot of land hold on to 60 millimeters of water from rooftop rainwater harvesting, either store it or recharge it into the aquifer? The city says no. Why? Because cheap subsidized water comes into homes. Why the hell would you want to harvest rainwater? I don't want to be part of the solution, but I want to be part of blaming whatever needs to be blamed for the problem. So therefore, there is steps which are being taken from a deep scientific understanding of what the city can do. We need to figure out whether this narrative is good enough and whether we need to build on it adequately or not. So we are capable of monitoring low-lying areas. We are capable of monitoring where the floods have occurred. We need to put the data into our remembrance, our head, and we need to design from the future, not from the past. The tanks do not play a role in flood control, can play a role for detention if we design the sluice gates appropriately as a holding structure, but model it on the intensity of rainfall that is likely to occur and use it as balancing reservoirs, which is a completely different ball game than what it plays now, right? So we need to do that. And why do we need Bengaluru Lake to be desilted? Why do we need large volumes of water in Bengaluru Lake? The paddy fields are gone. Why are we holding on to that water? What is it that makes us desilted? Why not let it remain a wetland? Some of these questions that we have to ask ourselves, because it's sucking in a lot of money. Yeah. So where does the money to go? What is to be done is part of the water question that we need to answer. I just stop there because there's a lot of information to hold on to, but I think nostalgia is a disease that we need to get a vaccination to as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. And we are here today to see what are the ways in which we get out of this situation. But I think for that you need to look at the fact that, obviously this is August 22 and this is September 22, and it might, from that perspective that you are sitting in, look like a slightly larger blotch. But in terms of population, it's quite a huge number of people are affected in that belt. And that's the northeastern part of Bangalore. And these are the two major wetlands that typically get flooded repeatedly in the eastern and northeastern part of Bangalore. And in the southwestern, the point is very simple. In the southwestern part of Bangalore, you have a sort of a very ridged terrain. So the water kind of drains quickly. Whereas here it is not so ridged. It is very flat terrain. And this we have known. I mean, as bird watchers, we have been studying these wetlands for a very long time. I remember that Vartur, which is in the lower circle on the right side, is Vartur Lake. I don't know if you know Narayan Reddy. Anyone knows him? He died 2-3 years ago. So once when we went bird watching there in the 80s, we found this man was farming there and the organic farm was there. And we literally actually, washed our faces in Vartur Lake. And if you went up north to Yelamalapachatti Lake, Sipla used to be there. We had a problem with Sipla polluting it. But a little further north of that was Oskote. The circumference of that was 21 kilometers. And one of the tasks I got riddled with a couple of my birding friends was that we found bird traps. And we decided to remove it. The problem is how do you bring it to the other side where the bund was. We literally had to walk the 21 kilometers carrying those heavy traps. So we decided to cut across the lake. And we did. And we were like neck deep in water, but we managed. And it was that kind of gradation. So just imagine 21 kilometer circumference, the massive area that Oskote is. Bengaluru in the 80s was not as polluted, but it was polluted already. And Vattur, of course, was not as badly polluted because that entire region was drained with wetlands and paddy fields. And we have seen tons of. So the important point here is this particular map here, which is basically looking at the census data of 2011. So what Amrita has done is basically taken the data out and seen what are the types of households that we have there. And in political terms, the response has been what the Chief Minister has given is to go there and listen to those who are vocal. And typically in cities like this, those who are vocal are people like us, and people much more vocal than us are the ones who matter to politicians. But what of those people who actually live there? Are they vocal enough? And we found that they don't have agency. And you see the darker the patch, lesser is the income. And it shows like in Koramangala, though Koramangala is filled with a large number of people who are very, very wealthy, in terms of numbers, there is a substantial population which is poor. Both because of the largest slum of Bangalore, which is Lakshman Rao Nagar and Ejipura slum, and also in the lower parts of Bengaluru. If you go there and if you try to get your way around that, you can't. Okay. You can see that this is how the income disparity is actually affecting in terms of no concrete roof. Now this is the next threat level up, and that's where the urbanization is pushing in. That's the darker patches that you see is actually the peri-urban Bangalore. So the darker the shade, the more households without a proper roof. That's an index of either poverty or low income neighborhoods. So, and you can take any part of Bangalore and you find these type of situations. And of course, scheduled caste population is also either side, scheduled tribes. But the important thing is this you have obviously seen. Okay. What do you do with this, right? And then if you take this part, and you can just go around 89, 95, 2000. So whatever you see which is not red is unbuilt area. And these were the marshy areas or paddy fields. And as you see which is happening now, there's hardly any space for water to go. So how do you get out of this? So the problem in 2022 is that there is no space for water to move. So how do you actually end up, this is where the slides end, but how do you end up having solutions to this type of a built problem, right? It's built, it's done. And the response of the city has been to go and break down, right? So I was in court yesterday, and I've been in court for 14 years now, and constructing an argument that the illegal city is our city. You can't just go and bulldoze and say, because large upper class, upper income, upper caste neighborhoods get flooded, then the Chief Minister goes there. But if Goripalya gets flooded, the Chief Minister doesn't go there. If Gutali gets flooded, Chief Minister doesn't go there. If Pinya gets flooded, Chief Minister doesn't go there. Whitefield gets flooded, next morning is there. So this has been not just Bommai's response. This has been the response from SM Krishna till now. And you can actually see in terms of the response that the Chief Minister provides to this kind of calling, in a sense, policies follow. And the policies that follow is to re-engineer this problem and say, we have a solution for that. And the latest solution we now have is to throw 1,500 crores, actually 2,000 crores into concrete. And concrete line the Kalways. And one of the arguments we have made in the Lakes case, I don't know if you're aware of it, so I'll just be brief in a couple of minutes, explain what the implications of that are to this problem. We worked on that in 2008. My colleague Bhargavi is here. So when we, along with Sunil, who is now a judge of the High Court, the three of us drafted the case, we dug into records from 1995. And Prem is here and Vishwanath is here, and they would know that we actually worked to stop the National Games Village in 95. We even took a public interest litigation. At that time, Prem and I were part of Civic Bangalore. Took a public interest litigation predicting that if you build that National Games Village, not only will the village go underwater, but the entire wetland, which is a 7-kilometer long wetland, will get flooded every time it rains. So it's not the amount of rainfall really. It's the fact that even with small amounts of rain, we'll have flooding. That was what we said in 95. Okay, and as typically as it happens then, in 95, the middle class did not respond. It was the poor people in the slum who came out and protested. And you know what the real response of the state was? To burn down the slum. And our memories are like so short. We don't remember an old woman and a pregnant woman got burnt in that fire, right? So the poor have actually responded to these crises in planning or other terms because it matters to them immediately. You take away a lake, their pastoral commons are gone. Their foraging grounds are gone. Their shitting grounds are gone. Right? And their playing grounds are gone. Dhobies don't have place to wash. And these are serious and critical functions of a city. So they have a reason to protest immediately. But the middle class, looks around, are you going, am I coming, should we all go? These type of conversations we get mired in, and we don't really realize that our inertia actually enables that kind of development. So what really happened in Bangalore from the mid-90s, since that case, the case got thrown out by Justice Rajendra Babu. Then in 2008, when we brought up this case, our argument was from 95, when we fought that case. At the same time, I don't know if you recall Zafar Fateh Ali, who passed away a few years ago, Lakshman Rao, H. Narsimhaya, and several others had filed a case in the High Court in 95 to say the Lakshman Rao Committee report of 1980s had not been implemented, and two of them were part of that, including Lakshman Rao, who chaired it. And so they were going back after a decade to say, you asked us to work, we gave you some solutions. So when we today talk about solutions, I'm giving a sense of that history, because I actually went to court in 95. So when we entered court in 2008, one day Mr. Fateh Ali's lawyer called me and said, you know what, I can see Captain Prabhala is here, he would definitely know that. He was part of that as well. He called me and said, 95 to 2008 we have been fighting. We have not been able to get any response from the High Court. So you guys have pitched this new battle on the, this question of flooding, lakes, wetlands, and so on. Can you also see if our case can get some life back? So we pulled that case into ours, and we built some energy into it. And in 2012, when the Justice N.K. Patil report came, we ensured that the 9 departments which were part of that committee, in which Justice Patil chaired, and Justice Patil is the only judge, the distinction is this, was a sitting judge of the court. He was not a retired judge. So the amount of importance that Chief Justice Kehar and Chief Justice Vikramjit Sen gave is largely in response to our arguments that there has been systemic failure to appreciate that this metropolis is building in a way that it is going to drown itself. So this is not something that we woke up to now. So if you read Justice Patil Committee's guidelines, which Subramanya, who is a well-known ornithologist, and several of us who learned bird watching, were trained by him. He looked at it from a wetlands perspective. So he worked to design what do you imagine should be the nature of protecting these wetlands, and what are wetlands in our construct. So typically the construct is the lakes. Everyone focuses on lakes. Like for instance, we have friends in United Way. They have taken lots of projects with BBMP and gone and ring fenced the lakes, and with concrete bunds. And we have argued that that is actually how we destroy the movement of water. Water is fluid. Don't pond it. The idea of having a pond is to hold it for a moment, not to arrest its flow. The fluidity of the city was arrested by this over-engineering of the lakes. So what really happened in the eastern part of Bangalore recently, and it could happen elsewhere, is that water doesn't get into the lake, or whatever gets into the lake doesn't get out, or worse, when there is heavy precipitation that we are now going to see more frequently due to climate change, and I'm hoping everybody accepts there is climate change in this world already, you get a lot of rain in too short a time, right? And when the topography is gentle here, the lakes flood and the downstream will flood. So if you went to Bengaluru, say, as I went in 1994 when I saw 35,000 waterfowl, most of which were migratory from Siberia and Eurasian region. It's recorded, it's in the Asian Wetlands Research Bureau. There's a group like that. And we used to document that. We stood on the tail end of the lake and we looked down, not the bund. We stood on the bund of the lake and we looked down, we saw a drop of 25-30 feet. And then it was all paddies for a couple of kilometers. We just couldn't see the end of paddies. And then when I went there in 2005, I was shocked. The paddies are gone. You could see earth filling. And that's when we actually asked, why are you doing this? If don't you see that water finds its way here? Those are the areas which are getting flooded. But you see, there is a problem here. And there's an article I've written, so I don't want to go too deep into that. The real problem is also that influence works in how land translates into real estate. And that is fantastically represented from National Games Village to Vartur today. And if you go even further, Whitefield. I mean, he passed away 4 years ago, but I recall C.J. Singh, a man who turned up in my office, in our ESG office about 2005. And he says, I have been living next to in the old Whitefield area. And there are water bodies all around. And here they have got this huge apartment complex behind the Singapore Technology Park. And there's a cart road. And through that cart road, they expect those people who live there, and this was supposed to be a senior citizens, retirement home. Suppose there's an emergency, the cart road will not accommodate the traffic. And you're saying I'm not just thinking from the traffic perspective, which will break down that neighborhood. I'm also looking at how water flows, because that lake was there. 1 minute? Yeah. The lake was there. He said if the lake floods, it will flood that area. He went to court, he fought the case, he fought against the governor himself. T.N. Chaturvedi was otherwise a reasonable man, went and inaugurated the project, so he took him to court. He says, you should have anticipated. So the reason I'm putting all this on the table today is that the lessons are there in the past. And I think one way we should look forward is it cannot come down from the top. The reason I mentioned all these names is because these are granular details of people's efforts for the last 4 or 5 decades. They have foreseen that this will happen. And today we are sitting in this room and I feel confident that if we can actually force down this idea, and I'm saying force down with a certain amount of emphasis. Prem and I were part of Civic from 92 looking at how do you actually democratize planning in a metropolitan area like Bangalore or anywhere else for that matter. So the 74th Amendment is a promise which has never been delivered. So for instance, the ward committees, which we all talk about now, is an outcome of a case ESG fought in which we argued that if you want to resolve the problem of waste management, it is only by democratization, not by setting up some technocentric or technical responses to that. You cannot technically and technologically and technocratically respond to these crises. This has been an argument. The court has listened to us. Court has agreed with it. How do you shift the technocratic mindset of bureaucracy and turn that into a deep humanism where you actually see a poor person's house and say, you know what, let me look at their housing rights first. Then let's talk about other things instead of using the bulldozer. Thank you.